The slave ship's cargo hold smelled of fear and filth. Metal cages lined the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with beings from dozens of worlds. Some wept quietly in the darkness. Others had stopped making sounds days ago. In the smallest cage near the back, the human woman sat with her knees pulled to her chest. She had been here for 11 days by her count, though time moved strangely in the lightless hold. Her name was, and 3 weeks ago she had been a mining engineer on a survey mission in the outer reaches of explored space. Then the raiders had come, and everything changed. She watched the aliens around her through half-closed eyes. There was a pattern to the guards' movements. Every 6 hours, 2 of them walked the length of the hold with shock sticks, checking the locks and looking for trouble. Every 12 hours, a different pair came with water tubes and nutrient paste, shoving them through the cage bars without ceremony. The guards wore light armor and carried sidearms, but they were careless. They had done this 1,000 times before, and they had stopped expecting resistance long ago. Noted everything: the spacing between the bars, the type of lock mechanism on each cage, the way the guards always started their rounds from the same end of the hold. She filed each detail away in her mind, building a map of possibilities. On the 12th day, the ship's engines changed pitch. They had arrived somewhere. The cargo hold doors opened, flooding the space with harsh blue light. Squinted against it as a new group of entered. These ones wore finer clothes than the guards, and they carried data pads instead of weapons. Buyers, she realized. They were at some kind of market. The aliens walked along the cages, pointing and making notes. When they reached cage, one of them stopped and tapped the bars with a long finger. Terran, the alien said in heavily accented Galactic Common. Rare stock, but small, what use? Labor pools, another replied. Or entertainment, the arena always needs fodder. The first alien made a dismissive sound and moved on. Watched them go, her expression blank. She had learned quickly that showing emotion attracted attention, and attention in this place was never good. The selection took hours. When it was done, roughly a third of the prisoners had been marked with colored tags attached to their cages. His tag was red. She did not know what red meant, but she saw that the other red-tagged prisoners were all large, dangerous-looking beings. Warriors, she guessed, or at least beings who looked like they could fight. The had made their first mistake. They loaded the red-tagged prisoners onto a different transport, a smaller ship with individual cells instead of open cages. Got her own cell, a metal box barely wide enough to stretch her arms. There was a drain in the floor and a water dispenser in the wall, but nothing else. She sat in the corner and continued to watch. The transport flew for what felt like several more days. Slept when she could and exercised when she was awake, working through the physical routines she had learned years ago. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, stretches. The movements were limited by the small space, but she adapted. She always adapted. When the ship finally landed, the prisoners were marched out single file into blazing sunlight. Blinked and raised a hand to shield her eyes, taking in her surroundings. They were in some kind of compound, a sprawling complex of low buildings surrounding a massive central structure. The structure was circular and tiered, with thousands of seats rising up around an open pit in the center. An arena. The prisoners were herded into one of the outer buildings and processed with cold efficiency. Aliens in medical garments scanned them with handheld devices, took samples of blood and tissue, and recorded the results. When they reached, they spent longer on her than the others. She could see them frowning at their readings, exchanging confused looks. Unusual biochemistry, one of them muttered. High endurance markers, elevated adrenaline capacity, but low mass, no natural weapons. Fodder tier, another said with a shrug. She'll last maybe 5 minutes. They fitted her with a collar, a heavy metal band that locked around her neck with an audible click. The alien doing the fitting explained in bored tones that the collar could deliver electric shocks, track her location, and inject sedatives if she tried to escape. listened without expression, and filed the information away. They gave her a cell in the fodder section, a block of small rooms at the far end of the compound. Her neighbors were a mix of species, all of them thin and frightened-looking. These were not warriors. These were the ones expected to die quickly, providing brief entertainment before the real fights began. Spent her first night in the cell studying its construction. The walls were solid stone, but the door was a simple barred gate with an electronic lock. The lock was connected to the central security system, which she had seen guards accessing through wall panels in the corridors. The panels required biometric authentication, but they also had physical override ports for maintenance purposes. She filed that away too. The next morning, an inexpensive robes came to inspect the new arrivals. He walked along the row of cells with a guard on each side, stopping occasionally to examine a prisoner more closely. When he reached cell, he paused. "This is the Terran?" he asked. "Yes, Arena Master Oran," one of the guards replied. "Arrived yesterday. Bioscans show nothing remarkable." Oran studied her through the bars. He was tall for his species, with mottled gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His expression was calculating, the look of someone who saw everything in terms of profit and loss. "Terrans are rare in this sector," he said. "There may be some novelty value. Put her in the morning matches tomorrow. If she dies well, we might recoup the purchase price from the—" He moved on without waiting for a response, watched him go and felt something cold settle in her chest. Tomorrow. She had until tomorrow. That night she did not sleep. She sat in the darkness of her cell and thought about everything she had seen since the raiders took her. The patterns of the guards, the layout of the compound, the mechanisms of the locks and collars. She thought about the arena, the vast pit surrounded by seats hungry for blood. And she thought about Earth. She thought about the long history of her species, the millions of years of evolution that had shaped humanity. They were not the strongest creatures on their world. They were not the fastest, the most venomous, or the best armored. But they had become the dominant species anyway, and they had done it through a combination of traits that no single alien species seemed to understand. Humans were persistence predators. Their ancestors had hunted by chasing prey for hours or days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could keep going long after other species gave up. They could function through pain and injury that would incapacitate other beings. Their bodies were designed for endurance, for recovery, for outlasting any opponent. Humans were tool users. They had weak claws and dull teeth, so they made weapons. They had thin skin and no fur, so they made armor and clothing. They looked at every problem as something to be solved with the right tool, the right technique, the right approach. And humans were pattern recognizers. They saw connections that others missed. They learned from observation. They adapted to new situations with terrifying speed. They saw a small, weak creature with no natural weapons. They put her in the fodder tier and expected her to die in minutes. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Thought about her father, a retired soldier who had taught her to fight before she was old enough to drive. She thought about her years in the mining corps, working in hostile environments where a moment's carelessness meant death. She thought about all the times she had faced impossible situations and found a way through. She was afraid. She would not pretend otherwise, but fear was just another signal, another piece of data to process and use. Fear kept you sharp. Fear kept you alive. When the first light of morning crept through the small window of her cell, was ready, not just for the fight that was coming, but for everything that would follow. She had made a plan, and she had made backup plans for the backup plans. The guards came for her an hour after dawn. They opened her cell and gestured with their shock sticks for her to follow. She walked between them with her head down and her shoulders slumped, playing the part of a terrified prisoner. They led her through a series of corridors to an equipment room where they fitted her with her fighting gear. The armor was a joke, thin leather straps and plates that would stop nothing. The weapon was worse, a short blade with a dull edge and a poor balance. It was equipment designed for prisoners who were expected to lose, given just enough to make the death slightly less immediate. Tested the blade's weight and edge while the guards watched with bored eyes. She adjusted her grip, found the balance point, and committed the weapon's characteristics to memory. It was a poor tool, but it was still a tool. She would make it work. They led her to a holding area beneath the arena, a dark space that smelled of blood and sand. She could hear the crowd above, the murmur of thousands of voices waiting for entertainment. The sound grew louder as another prisoner was brought in, a massive creature with 4 arms and bone-scythe appendages instead of hands. She remembered from the briefing materials she had once read about known species. They looked at her and laughed, a grinding sound that vibrated through its chest. "Little thing," it said, "you will be quick." Said nothing. She watched the move, noting how it distributed its weight, where it kept its arms when relaxed, how it turned its head to track movement. She saw the scars on its body from previous fights, the places where it had been wounded and healed. She built a map in her mind. The gate to the arena began to rise, and sunlight flooded the holding area. Heard the crowd react, a wave of sound that washed over her like physical force. She took a breath, let it out slowly, and walked forward into the light. The sand was soft beneath her feet, still cool in the morning shade. The arena was massive, a circular pit 50 meters across with walls too high to climb. The seats rose up around it in endless tiers, filled with aliens of every description. They looked down at her like spectators at a sport, which she supposed they were. On the far side of the arena, another gate opened and they emerged. It spread its 4 arms wide and roared for the crowd, playing to their expectations. They cheered in response, hungry for the violence to begin. Stood still and waited. She watched as it finished its display and turned to face her. She watched its eyes, the way they moved, the rhythm of its breathing. The starting horn sounded, and the charged moved. The crowd that morning had been small and disinterested. The early matches were always like this, half-empty seats and scattered spectators still recovering from the previous night's excesses. They came for the afternoon fights, the championship bouts, the battles between proven warriors. The morning was just a warm-up, a series of quick deaths to set the tone for the day. When the human appeared on the sand, most of them barely looked up. There was a familiar sight, a reliable opener that usually finished its opponents in seconds. The betting terminals did not even activate for fodder matches, since the outcomes were too predictable to generate interest. A few spectators made idle wagers among themselves, giving the human perhaps 30 seconds before the 4-armed giant tore her apart. They charged across the sand with the confidence of a creature that had never lost a morning bout. It was fast despite its size, covering the distance in moments, all 4 arms raised for the killing blow. The human was not where she should have been. She had moved at the last possible instant, sliding sideways and down in a motion so fluid it seemed almost rehearsed. The scythe swept through empty air, and before it could correct, the human was behind it. Her blade flashed once, quick and precise, and they stumbled. The crowd fell silent. The cut had opened the back of the creature's knee, slicing through the tendons that connected muscle to bone. It was not a killing wound, but it was crippling. The spun awkwardly, trying to track its target, but the human had already relocated. She was on its other side now, moving in a circular pattern that kept her constantly in its blind spots. Another cut, another wound, then another. It was trying to keep up, but it was like fighting smoke. Every time it committed to an attack, the human was somewhere else. Every time it left an opening, she was there to exploit it. She never struck at the parts of its body that were armored or protected. She only hit the soft places, the vulnerable joints, the spots where damage would accumulate. 4 minutes after the starting horn, it collapsed onto the sand. It was still alive, still conscious, but it could not stand. Its legs had given out from the accumulated damage, dozens of small wounds that had drained its strength and mobility. It lay there, breathing hard, as the human walked calmly away. The crowd was no longer disinterested. Arena Master Oran had been in his observation box, reviewing financial reports when the commotion started. He looked up to see the on the ground and the human standing untouched in the center of the arena. His 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "What happened?" he demanded. The Terran, one of his attendants, replied, voice tight with something that might have been excitement or fear. "She beat it, in minutes." Oran leaned forward, studying the small figure on the sand below. This was unexpected. This was potentially profitable. He made a quick decision. "Send in another." The second fighter was a blade dancer, a species known for their speed and agility. They were covered in flexible scales that turned aside most attacks, and they fought with paired curved blades that could cut through armor. They emerged from a side gate and immediately began circling, looking for an angle of attack. The human watched it come. She had not moved from her spot in the center of the arena, standing relaxed with her notched blade held loosely at her side. The saw this and interpreted it as fear or resignation. It moved in for the kill. The first exchange happened too fast for most of the crowd to follow. The lunged with both blades, a whirlwind of sharp edges, and the human somehow flowed between them. For a heartbeat they were close enough to touch, and then the human was past and was stumbling. A thin line of blood appeared on its neck, just above where its scales began. The crowd gasped. They had seen many fights in this arena, many battles between skilled warriors, but they had never seen anything like this. The human moved like water, like shadow, like something that had evolved specifically to kill things larger and more dangerous than itself. The recovered and came again, more cautiously this time. It tried to maintain distance, using its longer reach to keep the human at bay. But the human did not cooperate. She kept finding angles, kept slipping past the defenses, kept landing small wounds that were not immediately fatal but were definitely accumulating. The fight lasted longer than the first one, nearly 15 minutes, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Its movements grew slower as blood loss took its toll. Its attacks became desperate, sloppy. And then, finally, it made a mistake that it could not recover from, and the human's blade found its throat. Silence filled the arena. Oran's hands were shaking as he activated his comm unit. "Send the," he ordered, "the one we've been saving for Festival Day." The Berserker was a massive creature, even larger than the had been. Its species was known for their battle rage, a chemical state that flooded their bodies with pain-blocking hormones and gave them strength far beyond their normal limits. When enraged, it could shrug off wounds that would kill any other being and keep fighting until its heart literally burst. The human watched it emerge from the gate, seeing the way its eyes had already begun to glaze with the pre-battle trance. She did something unexpected then. She spoke. "You're going to make yourself angry," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent arena. "And you think that will make you stronger, but it will just make you stupid." The roared and charged. What followed was impatience and precision. The human did not try to stand against the Berserker's strength. She did not attempt to match its fury with her own. Instead, she simply kept moving, kept flowing, kept being somewhere else whenever this massive fists came crashing down. The Berserker's rage made it powerful, but it also made it predictable. It attacked in straight lines, committed fully to every strike, left itself open in its desperation to connect. The human exploited every opening, landing cuts to the backs of its legs, the insides of its arms, the base of its skull. None of the wounds were immediately fatal. All of them added up. The lasted longer than either of the previous fighters, its rage-fueled body refusing to acknowledge the damage it had taken. But even chemical enhancement could not overcome simple physics. Eventually, it had lost too much blood. Eventually, its legs gave out. Eventually, it fell. The human stood over its body, breathing steadily, and looked up at the observation box where Oran sat. The arena had filled while she was fighting. Word had spread through the complex, through the city, through the planetary networks. Spectators were crowding into every available seat, and millions more were watching through The betting pools had opened, crashed from the volume of activity, and reopened at astronomical odds. Oran found that his mouth had gone dry. He had purchased this human for almost nothing, expecting her to die in seconds. Now she had killed 3 of his fighters and was looking at him like she was waiting for more. He sent more. Over the next hour, the human faced 5 more opponents. Some came alone. Some came in pairs. Oran threw everything he had at her, every fighter in his stable that he could activate on short notice. The championship warriors, the ones reserved for special occasions. The exotic killers purchased at great expense from suppliers. She killed them all. She was not untouched. That would have been impossible against so many skilled opponents. By the end of the first hour, she had taken wounds to her arm, her side, her leg. Blood stained her inadequate armor, some of it her own. But she was still standing, still moving, still fighting with that terrible precision that made every motion count. 8 fighters lay dead or dying on the sand around her. The crowd had gone insane. This was the greatest entertainment they had ever seen, better than any festival day massacre or championship bout. They screamed and cheered and threw tokens of appreciation into the arena. They did not care that the human was supposed to be fodder. They only cared that she was magnificent. Oran did not share their enthusiasm. He was looking at the financial projections, at the cost of the fighters he had lost, at the chaos this was causing to his carefully planned schedule. He had built his arena's reputation on predictability, on giving the crowd exactly what they expected. This human was destroying everything. He made a decision. "Send the guards," he ordered, "all of them in this now." His attendants exchanged nervous looks. "Arena Master, the rules of engagement." "I don't care about the rules," Oran snarled. "That thing is not a fighter, it's a disaster. Send the guards, tranquilize her, drag her out. We'll say she collapsed from her wounds." The order went out. The first squad of guards assembled at the arena gate, checking their shock sticks and sedative injectors. They were not warriors. They were crowd control, trained to handle drunk spectators and occasional prisoner escapes. But there were 6 of them, armed and armored, against 1 wounded human. The squad leader looked through the gate at the figure standing in the arena. The human was watching the gate as if she knew what was coming, as if she had been expecting it. "Sir," the squad leader said into his comm, "I don't think this is a good idea." "I don't care what you think," Oran replied. "Do your job." The squad leader looked at his team. They looked back at him, and he saw the same thing in their eyes that he felt in his own gut. Fear. Real fear, the kind that came from seeing something that should not exist. The human had killed 8 professional fighters in an hour. 8 beings bred and trained for combat, many of them larger and stronger and better armed than anything the guards could imagine facing. She had killed them with a dull blade and leather armor, and she had made it look easy. The guards were not stupid. They knew what would happen if they walked through that gate. "I respectfully refuse," the squad leader said. There was a long silence on the comm. "What did you say?" "I said I refuse, Arena Master. My team refuses. We are not combat personnel, and that thing," he gestured at the arena, at the human standing calm and patient among the bodies, "that thing is something else. Send soldiers if you want her dead. Don't send us." Oran screamed threats and demands, but the squad leader had already closed the channel. He looked at his team, saw their relief, and felt his own. They would face consequences for this. They might lose their jobs, their pensions, maybe even their freedom, but at least they would be alive. The second squad refused before they even reached the gate. The third squad's leader sent a formal resignation before the order could be given. In the arena, the human sat down in the bloodied sand. She crossed her legs, rested her hands on her knees, and waited. She knew what was happening. She had planned for it or something like it. Oran would have to find another way. But his options were limited now. They were broadcasting live across the sector. Millions of beings were watching the empty arena, watching the human sit calmly among the bodies of her kills. The story was already spreading beyond his control. A human slave had destroyed an arena's entire fighter roster and forced the guards to mutiny. The Galactic Council would be asking questions soon. So would the media, the regulatory bodies, the anti-slavery organizations that were always looking for excuses to shut down operations like his. Oran had built his empire on staying below the radar, on being just profitable enough to be worth the bribes required to keep officials looking the other way. That time was over. In the arena, the human continued to wait. She was patient. She could be patient for a very long time. It was one of the things humans were good at. The crowd had fallen quiet now, sensing that something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer entertainment. This was something new, something they did not have words for. They watched the small figure on the sand and felt, perhaps for the first time in their pampered lives, a hint of the fear that the guards had felt. What kind of creature was this? What kind of species could produce something like this? In the observation box, Oran stared at the ruin of his arena and felt his world collapsing around him. He had made a terrible mistake when he bought that human. He had made another when he underestimated her. And now he was going to pay for both. He began to plan his escape. The first coalition ship arrived 6 hours after the massacre began. It was a patrol corvette, fast and lightly armed, the kind of vessel that responded to emergency beacons in the outer sectors. The crew had picked up an automated distress signal originating from the Arena complex, along with a burst of encrypted data that contained coordinates, facility layouts, and documentation of illegal slave trafficking operations. Commander studied the data with growing disbelief. The signal had been transmitted from inside the arena's control center, using override codes that should have been impossible for anyone without high-level access to obtain. Yet the security logs showed no breach, no intrusion, no unauthorized personnel anywhere near the control systems. Someone inside the facility had sent the beacon. Someone who knew exactly what information to include and exactly how to reach coalition channels. "Put me through to the arena authorities," ordered. The communication officer tried several times before shaking her head. "No response, Commander. All official channels are offline, but we're picking up civilian traffic, local news networks. Something is happening down there." Watched the feeds and felt her stomach tighten. She saw the arena floor littered with bodies. She saw the crowd sitting in stunned silence. And she saw the small figure in the center of it all, sitting cross-legged in the sand like she was meditating in a garden instead of a charnel house. "Get me everything we have on Terran capabilities," she ordered, "and scramble the rescue team. We're going in." The arena complex was in chaos when the coalition forces arrived. The guards had abandoned their posts after refusing to enter the arena, and the remaining staff were running in circles trying to decide whether to flee or stay. Arena Master Oran was nowhere to be found. His personal shuttle had left the compound 3 hours earlier, destination unknown. The rescue team moved through the complex with weapons drawn, expecting resistance that never came. They found the holding cells empty, the other prisoners long since fled or released by panicking staff. They found evidence lockers torn open and data systems wiped. They found a business in the middle of catastrophic collapse. And they found the human. She was still sitting in the arena when they reached her, exactly where they had shown her. The bodies around her had begun to attract insects in the afternoon heat, but she did not seem to notice or care. She looked up as the rescue team approached, and there was something in her eyes that made the team leader stop in his tracks. It was not aggression. It was not fear. It was evaluation. She was looking at them the same way she had looked at everything since her capture, cataloging, analyzing, preparing. The team leader asked carefully, "Terran citizen, we received your distress beacon." The human's expression did not change. "My beacon." The signal originated from the control center, encrypted with Terran coalition protocols. We assumed. "I didn't send any beacon," said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was not entirely surprised. "I was planning to, but I never got the chance." The team leader exchanged confused looks with his colleagues. If the human had not sent the signal, then who had? They would find out later, much later, that the beacon had been transmitted by an automated system, a dead man's switch that had set up during her first night in captivity. Using maintenance codes, she had observed the guards entering and equipment she had accessed through a ventilation shaft. She had prepared for rescue before she ever set foot in the arena. She had prepared for every possibility she could imagine. "Can you walk?" the team leader asked. Stood in one smooth motion, showing no sign of the wounds she had accumulated over hours of fighting. "I can walk." They led her out of the arena, through the abandoned corridors, to the landing zone where their shuttle waited. The complex was already being overrun by media drones and curiosity seekers, drawn by the that had made the morning's events famous across the sector. Everyone wanted to see the place where a single human had destroyed an arena. Ignored them all. She walked with her head up and her eyes forward, moving like someone who had already moved on to the next problem. The rescue team's medic tried to examine her wounds during the flight, but she waved him off with the observation that she had dealt with worse. She had, in fact, dealt with worse. The mining corps did not coddle its workers. Commander met them when they landed on the Corvette. She had reviewed all the footage by then, watched every moment of the fights, seen the guards refuse their orders and the arena master flee. She had thought she understood what she was looking at, but standing face to face with the human, she realized she had understood nothing. Was not physically impressive. She was short by most species standards, with none of the obvious markers of a dangerous predator. Her teeth were small and flat. Her hands had no claws. Her skin was thin and vulnerable. By every objective measure, she should have been exactly what the arena staff had assumed: fodder, disposable, not worth bothering with. But had seen the footage. "You killed 15 beings today," she said. "Professional fighters, some of them championship level." His expression did not flicker. 16, if they didn't survive. It was still breathing when I left, but the wounds were severe. "How?" asked. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question, one that she suspected many beings across the sector were asking right now. The human was silent for a long moment, considering how to answer. When she spoke, her voice was measured and calm. "My species spent millions of years learning how to kill things bigger than ourselves. It's what we do. It's who we are." She paused, looking out the viewport at the receding planet below. "They looked at me and saw prey. They never considered the alternative. That you might be a predator. That I might be the most dangerous kind of predator. The kind that doesn't look dangerous until it's too late." Thought about that for a long time after the human was escorted to the medical bay for proper treatment. She thought about all the species she had encountered in her career, all the different shapes that intelligence could take. She had met strength in many forms: physical power, psionic ability, technological advancement. But she had never met anything quite like this. Humans did not have the obvious advantages that most dangerous species possessed. They had developed their deadliness through different paths: pattern recognition, tool use, endurance, adaptability. They saw the world as a series of problems to be solved, and they solved those problems with whatever resources they had available. Give a human a dull blade and leather armor, and she would find a way to kill champions. The news spread faster than light, carried on the instantaneous networks that connected civilized space. A human slave had destroyed the ETH arena. She had killed the roster, broken the guards, and forced the arena master to flee. And then she had sat in the bloody sand and waited for rescue, as calm as if she had merely completed an unpleasant chore. The reactions were varied. Some saw it as proof of human barbarism, evidence that the Terran species was too dangerous to be trusted. Others saw it as a warning, a demonstration of what happened when you underestimated the newcomers to galactic society. And some, the slavers, the pirates, the operators of illegal fighting rings across a dozen systems, saw it as something else entirely. They saw the end of an era. Arena Master Iran was found 2 weeks later on a remote station in the Outer Rim. He had changed his appearance and assumed a new identity, but someone had recognized him from the... When coalition authorities arrived to take him into custody, they found him in a state of nervous collapse, barely able to speak coherently. He kept asking about the human. He kept asking if she was coming for him. She was not, of course, had been debriefed, treated for her injuries, and returned to Earth for a hero's welcome that she seemed to find more exhausting than her ordeal in the arena. She gave interviews when required and attended ceremonies when pressured, but mostly she just wanted to go back to work. There were asteroids to survey and minerals to extract. The universe did not stop turning just because she had killed some aliens. But the legend grew anyway. The story of the human who had walked into a gladiator pit as fodder and walked out as a nightmare. The story spread through the criminal underworld, through the slave markets, through every dark corner of space where the strong preyed on the weak. And slowly, quietly, things began to change. The first sign was the slave traders. Within a year of the ETH incident, as it came to be called, the major trafficking networks had added humans to their restricted lists. Not because of legal pressure or coalition intervention, but because the risk was too high. You could not look at a human and know what you were getting. That small, weak-looking creature might be cargo, or it might be the thing that destroyed your entire operation. The second sign was the arena circuit. Fighting rings across the sector began refusing human combatants, even volunteers. The insurance costs alone were prohibitive after ETH. No sensible operator wanted to risk their roster, their guards, or their reputation on the chance that they might acquire another. The third sign was subtler, but perhaps more significant. The galactic community began to look at humans differently, not as the harmless newcomers they had assumed, but as something unpredictable, something that could not be easily categorized or controlled, something that, when pushed into a corner, might do things that no one expected. Humans, it turned out, were survival specialists. Their entire evolutionary history was a story of overcoming obstacles that should have destroyed them: ice ages, predators, diseases, each other. They had built their civilization on stubbornness and creativity, on the refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Put a human in a situation where death seemed certain, and she would find a way to live. Put her in a situation where she was expected to die quickly, and she would make that death as expensive as possible for whoever had put her there. The ETH arena never reopened. The complex stood empty for years, slowly crumbling in the desert heat, a monument to the day when the galaxy learned that some prey was better left alone. Eventually, someone bought the land and built something else there. A memorial, some said, though to what was never entirely clear. Returned to the mining core and spent another decade extracting resources from dead rocks in the outer reaches. She retired eventually, bought a small house on a quiet world, and lived out her days in peace. She never spoke publicly about ETH after the initial interviews, never wrote a memoir or appeared in documentaries. When journalists came looking for her, she turned them away with firm politeness. "I did what I had to do," she told one particularly persistent reporter. "Any human would have done the same." That was the part that frightened the galaxy most. Not that was special, but that she was ordinary. Not that humans could produce one exceptional killer, but that they were all, at some level, capable of the same transformation. Push them far enough, take away their options, force them into a corner, and they would show you exactly what millions of years of predatory evolution had created. The galaxy had many apex predators. It had species that could crush metal with their bare hands, species that could kill with a thought, species that had conquered worlds with raw biological power. But humanity was something different. Humanity was what happened when a species became dangerous not through strength, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They did not reach the top of their food chain by being prey. And now the rest of the galaxy knew it, is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.